Right. I'd first of all like to thank everyone for coming. In case you're not aware, my name is Jim Campbell. I'm the marketing manager for Sparsile Books. We're a small boutique publisher in just outside Glasgow, in Scotland, if anybody's not from this wonderful country. And we're hoping to continue this, but Gabby has very kindly volunteered to be our guinea pig for the very first of these online talks and chats. And if you're not aware, she's offered to do a workshop at the end of the question and answer session. The way we intend doing this is we have a set of prepared questions, which I shall be asking Gabby, and also probably expanding on. And when that's finished, we will then have questions from any members of the audience, which Gabby will fortunately be the one who's answering, because by that time I'll have muted my microphone for the rest of the evening. And thank you very much for coming. And I would like you all to welcome our guest, Gabby, who is the only reason we're here, basically. So thank you very much. Gabby, over to you.
Thank you very much for having me, Jim. And it's really nice to meet thank you for the round of applause, Kathy. It's really nice to have some people I know from Orkney here and to have some new folk as well. And I'm really happy to be talking about the book, which it's lovely that it's really gone out into the world now, and I'm starting to get more and more feedback about. So it's really exciting to meet people who've read the book and hear what they thought of it as well. It takes a long time to write and generate, so getting feedback is just is fantastic. It's really rewarding.
Okay, well, if it's okay with you, will we start with the first questions?
Sure.
Okay. Well, first of all, what inspired you to write this book?
With a number of things crashing together, really. One was in my family, I've got a number of individuals who have long-term pain medication for rheumatoid arthritis or for other reasons, and I just see how hard their lives are living with long-term pain and taking long-term medication. And I notice it's often on the news that these medications are slightly vilified as addictive and harmful, but without really talking about why people need them. So that was one thing. And also my sister in her 20s had a very serious accident and broke her back. So she was on very strong medication, and that resulted in quite a long period of trying to reduce medication. And I wanted to, in a sympathetic way, kind of explore that experience, and in a dramatic way. So thinking about that was one thing. And the other thing I've been thinking about was women's voices in a small community, both contemporary and historically, and how people who are sick, particularly long-term sick, kind of lose their voice and their participation in the community. And I was interested in how can I dramatize that, and so that's part of my background, my thinking, and I just kind of began to consolidate and embody in the main character of Esther, and then ideas for how it could be inside a drama started to come to me.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I think that actually will resonate with a lot of people, because most of us have had a friend or a family member, even if it's not something that happened to us personally, which has shown us what dependency on painkillers can do, but also what not having those painkillers or other medicines can do, because the lack of medicine is a great deal worse than the help that you can give it. We wouldn't use it otherwise. No, that's very interesting. Now, you say that you wanted to explore both the idea of Esther's character, but also the drug dependency side, and how it affects someone both in their community as well as in their private life. Is that the entirety of where Esther's character came from, or did you feel that you were using a wider set of inspirations, as it were?
Well, I think my inspiration was also to have somebody who was maybe not an easy patient,
Mm-hmm.
because I think there's been lots of writing about people who've been unwell. There are stereotypes of easy patients or the kind of deserved sick who, are really, we feel really sympathetic for because they're really nice as well as being really unwell. And I thought, well, that's not just very real because people remain people, whether they're unwell or whether they're well. So I really wanted her to be quite a balanced and I guess within that, perhaps a slightly prickly person, that the person she always was is still there, even when she's unwell. Um, and this kind of long-term kind of dependency has maybe exaggerated some of those features, made her more prickly, and as those friends who tried to support her great tire of that supporting role, and as her natural prickliness, is maintained, um, that we have to come to terms with that and engage our sympathy as, on top of that. I felt that would be just more realistic. Um,
Um, I mean, in the story, as you say, she is quite a prickly character. Did you deliberately set out to create her that way because you wanted her to be more rounded, or were you actually considering that you were taking a risk here that the reader might not engage with the character early enough on in the book?
I think it was a risk, and I think it was a double risk, perhaps because of the way she doesn't talk directly to people as well. So you're in her thoughts, and in that way, she's incredibly candid because you're inside her head a lot. But she doesn't have that putting on that social airs and graces the way she converses with people, because she doesn't converse with people. She just says what she thinks in her head with no filter, but she doesn't say it out loud. So you end up getting a really unfiltered, quite raw version of Esther. She doesn't pull her punches. She's not trying to please anybody. So you don't get that social small talk politeness, which is perhaps how some characters endear themselves to readers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you get an absolutely see-through version of her, um, which makes her very vulnerable, I think. But I hoped it would make it possible to really engage with her quite quickly, even if she wasn't immediately likable. You're straight in there with what she's thinking. You know what she's thinking because you get that little thought train straight off.
Yes, I mean, I appreciate that, and I understand what you're doing there. I was just wondering whether it was a conscious decision from the start, and you've obviously answered that. The characterization you give for her is very strong. We understand her character at each point very well. And as you say, she's not a stereotype of, oh, this kind of person or that kind of person that you could just slot into any story you wanted, a bit like, an American soap opera. However, one of the things that I particularly admired about the book was your characterization, not only of the human characters, but of the background of Orkeny itself. The way you wrote Orkney is something that I think is a gift, and I'm not sure it can be taught, but you'll probably disagree with me. But I have read a number of writers that when you're reading their book, you can see what they're describing. You don't just understand it, you see it as if you were watching it in a film. And you've done that with Orkney in such a way that it is, to me at least, another character in the book, and a vitally important one. Is that something you deliberately set out to do, or is that something that just seems obvious and natural to you?
I think there's certain times where it's quite deliberate, where I'm choosing to use the landscape as something that's supporting or positive, or I'm using the landscape in a way which is perhaps alienating and difficult. And in fact, the landscape becomes in many ways, a map of Esther's mind. She's got places, physical places in Orkney, which terrify her deeply. She's got places where she feels really comfortable when she goes to visit her granny. There's that little, it's an almost suffocating place in that old people's home. And then there's the character of her granny's back room as well, which is with that stove and that heart in the home. So there's the landscape, and within the buildings as well. They're very much a map of Esther's mind, kind of laid out on the landscape as well, and the same way that the kind of weather and the tides and the seasons. So it's like a projection of all those different rooms of Esther's head in the Orkney landscape. She so intimately knows that corner of danger because she so intimately knows that piece of her mind as well. So I don't know if it comes naturally, but it is something which I'm aware takes a lot of time until I feel I've got it right. And perhaps that's that working towards that more cinematographic description, where it's almost like a script for a screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
Every word and every connotation from that word is blooming in somebody's head. And if you can get it right, you see it, like you said very kindly, Jim, that it has that kind of visual explosion in the mind. But it does take a lot of time.
Right. Well, thank you for that. The other thing that I thought was very noticeable about the book is you write in a quite lyrical style, and often quite poetic. And I must say that most of the authors in my life, and I've been reading since I was still in the womb, I think, and that wasn't yesterday. My favorite authors, the ones that I admire the most, always have a poetic style, which I find that style paints pictures, both of characters, individuals, backgrounds, in this case, Orkney, whatever, and they do it without describing it in the more pedestrian way that I would. And I've always admired that, and you very much have that as an element. So the much of the book it rhymes almost. I was wondering whether this was a conscious decision for you. Were you more invested in the way that the book sounded to a certain extent rather than the more normal form of writing?
It's a really good question. And I think for me, you've hit upon something. The cadence of the sentence flows is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So using simple, direct kind of words when I want something to feel quick, light, or feel intense and sharp, and then choosing vocabulary which has that longer, more melodic line to it. So in a sense, it's kind of constructing a narrative which does have a kind of almost a musicality to it in the way that you're using the words, so that it can slow the mind down and then it can quicken it up as well, by the choice of the way that phrases are put in there. I think, there are. It's about not over egging the pudding. So sometimes a good narrative block where the flow is just right, but then you break it up with something that just either slows you down or punctuates it, where the words have a different kind of cadence, or like a symphony with different movements. You kind of punctuate it slightly differently. And I think that only really starts to come together when I'm getting towards the final drafts, and I'm just starting to feel what's needed here, needed there, just to get that kind of feeling to it.
Thank you. I had a feeling that's what you were going to say, but I'm always far more interested in why somebody does it and how conscious they are of what they do, because sometimes really good poetic writers don't think about it. It just comes naturally to them. I suspect with you, it's a mixture of both. Mm-hmm. Now, Now, you have written in other genres, but you're a poet, you're a storyteller. This book, to me, felt intensely personal. And from what you said earlier about exploring the situation of women, especially in communities where they almost become invisible because they're no longer taking part in the same way because of illness, disability, drugs, being half Highland myself, I know sometimes alcoholism. But you were also very much talking about the landscape as a character and the individual parts within it, both in houses as well as outside. Would you say that this story was more personal to you than most of the other work that you've done?
I think it is more personal because of having that insight to some of the aspects of what Esther's kind of suffering through. And I think having insights into how complex family dynamics can be.
Mm-hmm.
And it always irritates me when you might read a novel or watch a film when members of the family are just conveniently sort of forgotten about or disposed of for the sake of the narrative. Whereas, the fact is that in Across the Silent Sea, there are the nephews always tagging along. There's always Granny to visit. There's that kind of complexity of family life, and I think that's perhaps what brings things closer to home is when you're using that intuition you've gained through personal experience, through observing other people's family dynamics, that you can start to build into a kind of fictional story. And then it allows you to explore those in different ways. Like, how would it work out if that happened or that happened? How would life have been different? If you gave somebody a different roll of the dice. I think the kind of the subplot, I don't really want to give too much away, but the sub, for anybody who's not read it, the subplot really explores how much chance can affect family lives as well. And then that can have like a ripple out echo through generations just because of one small decision or a sickness or a change that was made then has consequences beyond itself. I think that's quite interesting to explore.
Oh, thank you. We've talked about your original inspiration. We've talked about the view of women who are having to, from one reason or another, become invisible in communities, or at least less visible. The effect of drugs, illness, pain, etc. But we've also talked a great deal about the characterization of Esther, who is not some simpering little soul who's going to be grateful for somebody patting her on the head occasionally. And we've also talked about the characterization of Orkney, as well as many other people in the book. We've talked about your lyrical and poetical way of describing things, which, as I said, I very much admire. But one thing that we haven't talked about at all, which seemed to me quite important in the book, is music. Now, you have music in the book, and it's a very important area in some parts. Is that a passion of yours? Were you transferring your own passion into the book there, or was that something that you invented out of whole cloth?
I certainly didn't invent it. I do have a passion for music and a belief that music is how we defend ourselves against the wear and tear of the world. And if we lose our connection to our music, our song, we somehow lose connection to our strength of spirit as well. And if we lose that connection to that music, we're kind of losing connection to our own voice as well. Partly this came from, I did some work at the Kristen Linklater Voice Centre in Orkney, which talks about freeing the natural voice, and really expanded my understanding of voice as something that is really like a muscle you can develop and change. But people seem very boxed into, I have this voice, that's all I have. And her method through breath and body, connecting mind, body, and feeling through breath into a natural voice, allows for the voice to develop and grow. I was thinking with Esther, you know, her voice and her suppression of voice is so connected to her body, but also her mind and her heart, that releasing that through music, and the flute, because of the control of breath needed, is a way to really get to those deep, I suppose I'm talking almost like Freudian unconscious knots of emotion that she's holding in her body. But by working through the breath and re-engaging with some sort of, not firstly just noise making, that is fundamental to her rebuilding her kind of armor and her relationship with the world. And yes, and that musicality is really important. And one of my favorite scenes in the book is this lovely bit where she's listening on the phone to the concert that's being given. She's kind of one step removed, but she's starting to re-engage with it through her new French friend. So yes, that's really important, and that's something, you know, I have in my life. And I have a special playlist when I was writing this book that I played over and over again, Esther's songs. So I had the same songs, which varied from bluegrass to folk music to Puccini, all somehow connected me back to Esther's story. It's great.
Thank you very much. I personally find that fascinating because I'm incapable of writing if there's any noise in the background. I can maybe get away with classical music, but I'm distracted by any kind of song or anything else. I simply can't concentrate. So it's very interesting when you hear the different processes. And I did want to talk to you about your process because you've talked about the various different drafts, if you like, and how you work. I mean, I think you described it earlier as, messy blurts or something like that.
Yeah.
How do you actually work? Do you sit down and allocate certain amounts of time that, right, I'm writing and nobody's allowed to disturb me? Or do you fit it in between all the different parts of your life? Do you use candles? You've already talked about the music. What are your routines?
Well, if I'm on the first messy blurt, I'm slightly ashamed to say that I'm entirely caffeine motivated. So I will sit down and I will not allow myself my first cup of coffee until I have done my 1,000 words. So sometimes that can make for a very late and irritable coffee because it can be very, very slow. And sometimes if things are going well and writing fast, I'll go over that limit that I set myself and I'll be fantastic, coffee at 10:15 today. I'm motoring. If not, it's like, it could be 12:15 and I'm getting really niggly by this point. But it's a way of, it's a kind of artificial bum glue. It's like, no, you don't stand up and start, releasing yourself from this until we've got somewhere this morning. So I have a routine. Yeah, first thing, get up, start writing, get to that, whatever I've set myself as my target. If I'm editing, I'm much more gentle with myself. It's quite difficult to get down to. I just say 20 minutes. I'll just do 20 minutes. Often that will extend to an hour or a bit more, but 20 minutes and then I give up. But for the blurt, it's definitely coffee motivated and it's sit down first thing in the morning, hopefully every morning in a row until that first blurt is done. So maybe a day off at the weekend, but to get that first vomit draft is quite explosive, or it has to be quite intense.
Mm-hmm.
Once I'm ready to do it, which might have involved some research and planning, but once I'm ready, it's got to kind of come out quite quickly.
Okay. Well, I've noticed that we've been taking up quite a lot of time, and I know that you've still got a workshop at the end of this. So, can I ask you one last question, if I may? Have you started your next book? And is it going to have Orkney as one of its characters?
I have. I'm really close to finishing it, actually. I'm just polishing it up. And it definitely has Orkney as a strong character. And I'm really excited about it. It's exploring quite different ideas, exploring the ideas of social taboos, I suppose. And yes, Orkney is a character. It reaches out a little bit further, reaches down into the south to London and Oxford a little bit. And in fact, it reaches a lot further south because there's one character's from New Zealand in it, where I've also lived for a short while. So I thought, why not? But it is based on Orkney, and yeah, that's really starting to come together now. So I'm really excited about that. And I think if you enjoyed Across the Silent Sea, and enjoyed the landscape in there and that kind of exploration of complex people, then you'll enjoy this as well. There's loads to get your teeth into.
I must say, I'm very much looking forward to that. I don't think I've got any more questions, and I realise there will probably be a number of people there waiting to ask you questions of their own. So, if I may, thank everybody for putting up with me, and thank you very much for Gabby for your wonderful talk. I am now going to mute myself, and Leslie will control who speaks and who asks questions from Gabby from now on. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you. So can I just say one little thing, because I completely forgot to mention this, is that we're doing Gabby's book on a special offer tonight for anyone who participated. I'm now going to try very hard to show you that, which I think I can. There we are. So it's down at $7.99. Now, unfortunately, we still have to charge postage and packaging. We just can't get the rates not to. So you might find it cheaper elsewhere, but we'll keep it like this at least until tomorrow. So I will let you get on. And Gabby, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, so are we going to just go straight to Q&A? And I think either just put your hand up or do the reaction or something, and I will unmute you.
Yes, Kathy.
Hi there. Hi, Gabby. I was just wondering, what's your approach to writing a novel? Do you plan it all out carefully first, or do you just jump in and start at chapter 1 and see where it goes?
I'm definitely a start at the beginning sort of person, but I would say I only have planned probably to just after halfway. So I kind of have the real start of the arc and the start of the subplots that I want to get going, and I know the characters very well, but then the characters might do an unexpected thing, or I'll think, oh, this is where that needs to go now, or yeah. So there is, I say I'm probably just over halfway. I'm kind of pretty firmly planned, and then as I'm writing, I'm kind of planning. It's a bit like I'm planning as I get along, closer and closer and closer until I get to the end, but I probably don't have the end planned until I'm really, really close to it. So the kind of couple of chapters before. So it's like a runaway hare. I'm gradually getting closer and closer to what I've not got planned. And then that final couple of chapters, then I know where I'm going to land.
Yeah. So the ending's a lovely surprise for you as well as everybody else. That's nice.
Yeah, so it kind of keeps it fresh. I kind of get more and more inklings of where it's going, but I wouldn't, I don't know, I wouldn't want to lose that freshness of having it totally like set until I'm ready for it. Yeah. Thank you. That's a really lovely question.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Anne, let me and ask you to unmute.
I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted.
Hi, Gabby, and I've got a confession to make. I've been so busy that I was going to actually download your book, and I didn't do it until earlier this evening, and I've only scanned through bits of it. But as a lot of people here know, I was a medic, and this book is absolutely up my street, because if there's one thing that made me very irritated as 30 years as a GP was the number of women in chronic pain who were belittled by even senior consultants who should have known better about pain. And I'm really, really interested in what you're doing with it. And even just glancing through the first few chapters, speed reading, the lyrical description of the even the birds, and your spare usage of language was tremendous. I really loved it. And I think the fact that you've used a woman, never mind the relationships within the Orkney small area, if you like, and the family situation, is very important, because I think it's completely neglected. And in fact, even when it comes to painkillers, many people may not know, but women have been excluded from much research on pharmaceuticals. So no one had a clue really how they did with them. And I think this is a book that deserves quite a wide distribution, because I think it's a very important thing to have written, and to have written it so beautifully, and also tiny little things that really will get to a woman, like, she realizes she can see her nail varnish is growing up her nails. She's not even bothered taking it off or seeing anything about it. And that is it's the kind of thing that a GP will notice in someone. And her GP is from another culture, so that's not going to help much either. So there's a huge number of things that this throws up. And I think even things that you've instinctively put in that you maybe don't realise are really important. And I actually think I will have a few doctors that I'll be buying this for.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm really interested in the way that you've written this, that you get halfway. And I think a great thing about writing, which Kathy has taught me, is it's really nice when the characters do things you don't kind of expect, and you don't know the ending, so it stays fresh with you. And I really applaud that. I really applaud the fact that you go up and don't even have a cup of tea in the morning. There's no way I could get at the keyboard without a cup of tea. So sorry, that wasn't really a question. It was just a comment on the importance of this kind of thing. And putting it in such a lyrical way, I think, is quite remarkable. I'm looking forward to reading the rest. And of course, I didn't get a discount because I bought it from the start. Buy some other books.
Sorry, Anne. Sorry, Anne.
That's okay.
It's really interesting, actually, Anne, hearing you talk makes me realise, oh, maybe I was exploring something from my own experience. I was listening on the radio. There was a young lady, like really young, 19, and she had post-viral fatigue syndrome. And she talked very eloquently about how schooling had become impossible, and how friends who had been in touch to start with stopped asking her to things, stopped being in touch, just stopped inviting her, became embarrassed even to see her. And it was really, really tender, really sad. And she was really lonely. And she spoke about how hard it is, not just living with the pain, but living with the isolation. And I thought, oh, I really get that. And I realized I really get that. I had glandular fever when I was 17. I had to repeat a year at school. And it was a tremendously isolating experience, particularly as a teenager, to just not be able to do anything. When
that is another story. That is another book.
When everybody else in the world is doing everything, and you going from 1 week having a full timetable, doing absolutely everything you please, to the next week being unable to get out of your bed, and then that lasting for months, that paralytic weakness, that and I think perhaps through Esther's kind of isolation, and that just absolutely furious with the world that you're like, that this is happening.
And you lose your confidence, because people are, after a while, because you're not getting better, the doctors get frustrated and they assume it's psychosomatic. And that is the most demoralizing thing of all.
Yeah, it can be really difficult. Or you get, told, come back next week. We'll see how you are next week.
Yeah.
As if you will.
You'll be lucky if you get that now, of course, because nobody's seeing anybody, but there you go.
So I guess
anyway, so I think it's a very important book, actually.
Yeah. So maybe there's more in there. The subconscious has got more in there of me. As Jim observed, it feels more personal. Maybe it is more personal than even I know, because it's touching on some of these things. Thank you, Anne. It was a really lovely question.
Any more questions? Yeah, I'd like to ask Gabby, how important do you think it is to spend quite a while creating a book? I see some authors who kind of throw something down in a week, and some authors who take years to put something together. Where do you fall in that sort of balance?
Well, I think my process is that vomit draft, okay? I would never let anybody read that. That is for nobody's eyes, because I know what it can be when I've worked on it to bring it to its absolute ripeness, you know, to bring it where it can be. And that takes me a long time. So perhaps if you become very skilled and you're able to make your blurt into your final draft, I mean, that's an incredible thing to be able to do. But I think it misses something perhaps. Sometimes it takes me a very long time to get the insight I need to improve something. And I don't know why it takes that long. And it's like, why did it take me 3 years of working on this manuscript to realize this scene needs to have the father-son characters reversed? Why did I not see that earlier? Well, I never would have seen it unless I'd sat with that manuscript for a long time. So there's something for me about that process of insight, which in terms of the blurt can be quite rapid. The ideas are there, but in terms of sometimes other aspects being quite slow and quite surprising and very frustrating. It's like, why didn't I see that? It's clearly the best thing to do. And there's something about that, the Gabby 3 years down the line, who's different from the Gabby who wrote the blurt. You know, she's seen different things, thought about different things. She's coming at it. She's better, or she's different. She's bringing something new to it. And letting all those future and past selves have those sorts of conversations editorially can be really fruitful.
That's really helpful. I very much agree with that. I don't like the trend nowadays, and I think a lot of publishers force authors to throw books out like tins of beans in a factory. So I'm pleased to hear that. I think we have another question from Janice. I need you to unmute your mic. Thanks.
Hi, Janice.
Thank you. Hi, Gabrielle. Well, as you know, I've had a long opportunity to question you about the book and taken good advantage of that. So just a couple of very small questions about what you were talking about in the question and answer sessions. In this particular book, what was the proportion of time from research, messy blurt, final edit? What proportion of time was allotted to those things?
Okay, this is going to have to require some candid answering. Messy blurt, I would say about 3 months, but which sounds short, but actually if you're doing it every day until you're allowed your coffee, that's quite a lot of writing. It's quite a decent chunk of time to get to generate 80,000 words. So that's kind of 1,000 word a day, I suppose. Research, I think initially probably was about the same amount of time, but then I went back and I did more as I started on the second draft, and then knew what I needed. I knew what I didn't know, and that what I needed to know, and I needed to make sure as I re-edited that I was getting things right. So I didn't want to be frustrated 2 drafts later down the line saying, oh, that's factually incorrect. So with that first redrafting, there was probably another 6 to 12 weeks of not researching every day, but regular library visits. And then, yes, lots of reshaping. I would say probably a year to 18 months of reshaping. And then I got fantastic comments back. And this is where those periods of insight and dialogue with that past self who wrote it, and that would have taken another kind of, I would think, 9 months to a year. Firstly, to recover from feedback, and secondly, to let that be part of my process of insight. You can call it corrections, but I like to call it insights, rebranded.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And do you have a title proposed for this book that you've got almost complete, and a time scale for?
I do have a
out?
title, and it won't give much away, but it's called Archipelago, and it's really getting towards the end of the final draft now, so I'm quite excited with that. It's been a long time in gestation. It's been kind of 3 years writing to get to this. My projects kind of stack up a bit, and then one rolls into completion, but yeah, it takes a long time.
So I do hope you'd consider coming back to the Bury Book Club to
Definitely
talk about that one.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got Liz now wanting to ask a question.
Yeah, it's a short question. Once you've started to write a book, do you always finish it? Or have you got ones that you've started that are still hanging around?
That's a really good question. And I do have one where I started in COVID. It was a dystopia. Who knew? And it's a kind of science fiction-y, like a kind of Ursula Le Guin science fiction. I was exploring some of the COVID ideas, and I really like the idea, and I would like to go back to it, but I wasn't disciplined to my blurt habit, so I would write a bit and then leave it and not go back to it, and that I just kind of fell out of doing it. So that's got maybe 20,000 words to it, but all the characters are there. But usually, once I've done all that thinking, I don't have many. I have some finished terrible manuscripts that were done a long time ago, but I don't have many unfinished things where the idea has really come and got me. But there is one just sitting there. Yes, I will go back to it one day, perhaps.